What would happen if every time you sold a life insurance policy, you knew that 1 year later that person would die, exactly as you envisioned? This is the unsettling question that plagued me since I started working as an insurance agent. My name is Sarah, and my job, which seemed routine and sometimes boring, turned into a nightmare that haunts me to this day. What began as a promising career filled with dreams and financial goals transformed into a dark labyrinth I could not escape. At first, it was just a job, a duty I fulfilled each day, trying to help people secure their futures. But that changed when I began to notice a terrifying pattern. I clearly remember my first client, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson. I sold him a life insurance policy, explained the terms, and he, with a smile on his face, accepted without hesitation. A year later, on the exact anniversary of the contract signing, I received a call that would change my life. Mr. Thompson had died in a car accident. The strange part was that at the moment I calculated the risks and drafted his policy, I had pictured his death in a crash. At that moment, I treated it as a mere coincidence, a whim of fate. However, as time passed, the phenomenon began to repeat itself. Every client I sold a policy to died exactly 1 year later, and each time, in the way I had imagined while assessing the risks. In the blink of an eye, my life turned into a series of sleepless nights, paralyzing thoughts, and a terror that grew with each new policy. My coworkers could not understand the reasons behind my increasing anxiety. I smiled, pretended everything was fine, but every time a client signed their policy, a shadow loomed over me. Fear morphed into horror when I realized that the deaths weren't merely coincidences, they were predictions. In a moment of desperation, I decided to stop selling policies, but the damage was already done. The deaths continued, each more cruel than the last, and the weight of their lives in my hands became unbearable. I confided in my best friend, Emily, but her reaction was skeptical. "Sarah, you need to stop thinking like that. It's just work. Coincidences happen," she said, but I knew they weren't mere coincidences. I was trapped in a macabre cycle that I could not break. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and my anxiety transformed into a constant state of depression. I decided to dig deeper into the matter, searching for answers wherever possible. I came across stories of other insurance agents who had also experienced visions and premonitions. As I read, I understood I was not alone in this. However, none of those stories told how to escape this fate, how to deal with the fact that I had been the cause of so much suffering. My world became gray and gloomy. Every smile felt like a cruel mockery of the horror I was living inside. One day, I resolved to return to the office, trying to regain control of my life. However, that return was disastrous. While reviewing files, an intense cold ran down my spine. The image of a young woman with long dark hair stared at me from a photograph. Her name was Laura, a recently acquired client. I felt a chill as I recalled I had calculated her policy the day before and had visualized her death in a strange fire. Unable to bear the idea of her dying, I ran to the break room and vomited. Reality hit me with full force, and I realized I couldn't go on like this. I made it my mission to find solutions, to discover a way to break this cycle. If I could foresee the deaths, perhaps I could prevent them. I began researching rituals, urban legends, and anything that promised to change fate. I found stories about people who had made pacts to save others' lives, but all of them came with a high price. In my state of desperation, I considered the darkest option, the possibility of sacrificing something or someone in exchange for a future free of deaths. I could not let another client die, so in a moment of madness, I decided to act. I searched for Laura, the woman in the photograph, and discovered she lived alone in a small apartment. I knocked on her door, and when I saw her, terror seized me. She was beautiful, a young woman full of life. The thought of her dying tormented me. I decided to talk to her, trying to explain the situation in hopes of convincing her to cancel the policy. Laura smiled when she heard my story, seeming skeptical, even amused by the drama I was constructing. "Sarah, There's nothing to worry about. It's just a policy. Life goes on, she said with a carefree laugh. But I knew it wasn't just a policy. I couldn't let that thought linger in her mind. I remembered every client I had lost, every face that still haunted me at night. In a last-ditch effort to save her, I proposed to stay with her that night, hoping to avoid the horror looming over her future. We talked for hours, but as the clock ticked, the atmosphere grew tenser. At 3 in the morning, a heart-wrenching scream echoed down the street. I ran to the balcony, horrified to see a blaze roaring in the alleyway. The image struck me like lightning. In my mind, I clearly envisioned Laura trapped in the flames. I knew that fate was about to fulfill its cruel design. I rushed back into her apartment, finding her in the living room with a look of confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked. Desperate, I grabbed her arm. "You have to leave. We need to go now." But it was too late. A loud crash pierced the night. The flames were spreading rapidly, devouring everything in their path. I tried to open the door, but it was stuck. In a moment of absolute terror, I felt time freeze. Deep down, I knew I had failed. The screams rose in the street, and the fire drew closer. Then I realized I could not let Laura suffer for my decisions. As the heat intensified, I did what I thought I had to do. I pushed her with all my strength toward the window, urging her to jump into the courtyard below. "Go, jump," I shouted. She hesitated for a moment, stunned. It was then that I lost control. "Do it." I pushed her, and she fell into the void while I returned to the embrace of the flames. Laura's soul was saved, but mine was condemned. I suffered in agony, watching my surroundings burn. In the last moment of clarity, I understood I would never escape my fate, and the cycle of death I had created would continue. So I continued to sell life insurance for a while, knowing that every signature I placed on a contract could be the last act of someone. The worst part was that somehow I had created my own curse. Every year, I held a kind of mourning for those I had lost, and even though Laura had survived, her face would always be present in my nightmares. But the story doesn't end there. Shortly after, I received a call from the office. They wanted me to attend a meeting, and although I knew it was not a good time, I could not refuse. Upon arrival, I saw Laura, smiling, on the opposite side of the room. She approached and hugged me. "Thank you for saving me," she said. In that instant, a dark thought crossed my mind. If she had survived, perhaps I could too, just a little longer. But fate is relentless. The curse that had taken shape within me extended to those who drew near. So before anyone else died because of me, I decided to walk away, flee, hide in the shadow of my own mistakes. Now, 1 year after the last policy I signed, I find myself writing this story, dreading the next call that will never stop coming. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Comment below what you think of this unsettling experience. What would you do if your job had this dark power? I invite you to follow me on this journey full of mysteries, tales, and secrets hidden in the shadows.